evening. For those of you, I spoke here, I guess it was almost 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago. If any of you were here, you will remember we had the protesters in the back of the room with their signs. And we were expecting protesters today, and they didn't show up, so maybe that's a good thing. All the prayers you guys said work. So, yes, I'm with Moms for Liberty. I've been with them for 3 years. The organization's been around for 5. When they were started, it was during the COVID period in Florida. And when they started Moms for Liberty, they said, we want our 5-year strategic goal is to have all 67 counties with Moms for Liberty chapters in Florida. In January, we hit our 5-year mark, and we have over 300 chapters. We're in all 50 states, and we have over 300,000 members. So it really exceeded what they set out to do. And a couple other stats, we have 430 school board seats that we've won. 9 chapter leaders are now serving in state legislators in those states, including one in Wisconsin. Amanda Nedweski actually started the Kenosha chapter. That was the first chapter, and she is in her 2nd term as an assembly person. 55 bills in 12 states have been signed into law, and we have passed out over 1 million constitutions to 8th graders across the nation. So we've done a lot of things. In Wisconsin, we're continuing to grow, and part of my job, and there's 3 other ambassadors, is to get chapters started. And I will say a big shout out and thank you to everyone in this room, because when I was here the last time, you encouraged several young ladies to step forward and start a chapter here, and they've been very successful. And I personally want to say thank you to Adrienne Wilson, who's been your chapter chair. She is leaving. She's moving to Brown County, and I'm working on her because I don't have a Brown County chapter. She just doesn't know what God has in store for her. We have a person who's willing to step up. We're working with her right now through completing all the paperwork. We were hoping she was going to be here tonight, but something probably happened. Maybe she still might come in. So we're really excited about that, but we're continuing to want to grow the Wapaka Moms for Liberty chapter. One of the things that I've gotten really involved in the last 2 years is with being an ambassador. I travel the state. I get to talk to a lot of counties. I'm meeting tons of people. And I'm able to get what's really on people's mind, no different than our legislators, right? We get feedback from parents and grandparents and just citizens in general, and people are upset, right? And we need more people to step forward to try to make that change in whatever capacity that you feel comfortable doing. There's just a lot of craziness going on out there, and I co-chair the Moms for Liberty Wisconsin Legislative Committee, and we had our 2nd annual legislative day at the Capitol this year. Extremely well attended. We have built incredible relationships with our assembly and senators. Rachel is a great supporter. Tony's been working with us in his capacity. We're just seeing a lot of camaraderie, and we're working together on all the parents' rights issues. Moms for Liberty just released an AI bill that we've got a model policy for schools, and we have a model policy for states. So we're going to be shopping that around to different legislators in Wisconsin to see if we can't get someone to support it for us. We're joyful warriors. That is our biggest thing. As when the left stands up and says all the awful things that they say about us, we just smile, we pray, and we walk away being joyful warriors. I don't know if you've heard in the news, but the SPLC recently has been taken down. Yes. A lot of prayer from Moms for Liberty people. I'll tell you, because they have canceled so many of our venues. We had a venue in an event in Door County, and they canceled 2 venues on us, and we finally had to secretly find a 3rd one. When the Republican convention was down in Milwaukee, we had a big event for Moms for Liberty, and they canceled our venue 24 hours prior to our event. So they had a summit in Philadelphia in 2023, and they brought so much hate to the poor moms and grandmas that attended that. It was crazy. People were fearful for their lives. Parents were there with their children coming together at a Moms for Liberty Summit, and they had to get extra hotel security, extra police security. At one point, our CEO was talking to the security saying, can we keep our moms safe? Because this is ridiculous. They broke windows at the venue. They were throwing stuff at the buses. It was just horrendous. I'm sure some of these ladies have nightmares about what they went through. But they did it in a joyful warrior standpoint. They didn't give up. They didn't go home, and they just learned to fight harder. But people, in different chapters, they put so much hate out there that people lost their jobs. I mean, you hear about that from time to time, but they really, on social media, are so cruel, and that's just not what we're about. And we're not going to play that game. We're always going to be above board, and we're proud of that. I want to talk about a couple of key issues. You know, the first time I was here, I was talking about the pornographic books, and I spent a year trying to get those out of the classrooms, and we weren't very successful, and God keeps talking to me about continuing that work, and I'm going to figure it out. But the last 18 months, I've really did a deep dive into our curriculum and the scores that our children are getting in school. And I'm sure you've all seen the stats. 50% of the kids in Wisconsin do not read at grade level or perform math. So these kids are graduating high school and not able to read. We had a student from Oshkosh. His dad came and approached one of the school board members last year and said, my son just graduated high school, and I was so excited because he was going to go to the tech because I was in the service and I didn't want my son to go into the service. He did not get accepted to the tech. And they're like, what the heck? I mean, who doesn't get accepted to the tech? They did testing on him. He read at the 4th grade level. His dad said, I went to every parent-teacher conference. No one ever told me he was that far behind. Think of being that child all those years, sitting in a classroom, probably on your cell phone at this point because you have no idea what's going on, you can't read, you can't follow the content, and nobody did anything about it. He's not the only one. He is not the only one. The one thing that I find out when I talk to parents is they use terms like, well, your child is progressing. Your child's doing fine. You don't need to worry about it. You need to worry about it. And if you're grandparents, you need to talk to your grandchildren and your kids to talk to their kids because it's like a secret thing. They will not tell you. You need to stop and say, I'm not leaving this office till you tell me exactly what grade level my child is reading at and what grade level they are performing math at. We have on another school board, she just got on last year, and her child has been behind in math. And she's been in a math intervention for 3 years. They've never told her how far behind she was. She finally got someone to sit down, and she's like, I want to know. The vice principal finally met with her. Her child was in 6th grade, and they said she's doing math at the beginning of 4th grade level. This is after 3 years of intervention. Now, she could have been sending her kids to a summer school. She could have been getting a tutor, but if they're not above board and to tell you exactly what's going on, how can a parent even decide what the best intervention is? And that's scary. But what you will hear is they focus on the 50% of how great these kids are that are graduating at grade level. And I know Rachel's probably heard some of this because she's dealing with the universities. What the universities are having to do now is create a curriculum to somehow get the kids who are graduating high school up to a speed that they actually can enter into college level courses. And that's ridiculous. But they're dumbing down the ACT. They significantly changed that already. So they're trying to make it easier, and that's not what we need. We need them to quit changing the standards and get our kids up to speed and operating at those standards. It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And what we're seeing is they've changed the grade structure. You know, when we went to school, it was the A, B, C, D, F, right? Well, now nobody can fail, and they think it's racist if you give somebody an F. So they went to summer schools are at 1, 2, 3, some are at 1, 2, 3, 4, and there are a few schools, and I don't know what New London is, that have the ABC standard still, but not many. So what's happening is you could have 80 kids graduate with a 4, and that means like a 4.0, right? It's a 1, 2, 3, 4, that's the scale. And so what these kids are finding is they're going into college and they can't do the work, and the parents and the kids are like, I've been on honor roll all my life. I've gotten 4s through every grade. I graduated with a 4, but they're not operating at grade level. And again, that's really shameful. So that's one of the things that I'm really fighting for. The other thing that happened in 2023, and I will say the Assembly and the Senate has really helped trying to fight this, but with Governor Nevers, he vetoes everything that we try to put through. In 2023, DPI, which is the Department of Instruction for Wisconsin, did an off-site meeting down at the Dells and spent $400,000 with a cohort of teachers that had to sign NDAs so no one would know who they are and what they did down there. And they changed the grading structure. So they changed what they call the cut scores so that we are no longer aligned to national standards. We used to be aligned, and in fact, Governor Evers got us there when he was the superintendent, and now we are no longer aligned. And what that did is it inflated the scores. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what that looks like. In New London, in 2022, 43% of their 0.5% of their kids were at grade level in ELA. And in 2023, it went up to 54 overnight. Nothing changed. Instruction didn't change. The books didn't change. Nothing changed in the school, but arbitrarily that went up that much. And in math, it was very similar. It was 47.4 and then went to 59.7. So all of a sudden, they're starting to look like they're a little bit more like rock stars. I pulled Wyawega, I've got Wapak, and I've got Clinton as well. They're all a little bit different, and I have some of those printed, or if you have a school you want me to check, I can certainly do that. But what really is aggravating is they hide this stuff, and because I've been tracking it for years, and I've talked to other, what I call my data geek friends that have been tracking it for 10 years, they do that so that you can't trend what is the last 10 years. I don't care what you say, I'm trending, and I'm showing everybody how inflated these scores are. And it can be anywhere from 3% to 15% overnight magically, just inflated. And that's just not right. It's just not right. And we did, the legislators tried to get that overturned and were unable to do so. So I'm going to continue to fight that fight. I'm going to continue to try to educate parents because I think we need more parents going in and just demanding that they have transparency there. The other thing that's you may hear and might be coming up in the Wapaka County is referendums. We're seeing people, school boards across the state of Wisconsin putting forward what's called an operational referendum. And what that means is all of a sudden their budget is not supporting their ongoing costs. And why that is after COVID, the federal government gave almost all the schools the ability to get funding, and it was called ESSER funding. That funding has now stopped, and the schools were supposed to spend that on intervention, things to do with COVID related. They weren't supposed to do anything that was really an ongoing cost. And that instead of doing it for temporary things, they hired teachers, they've built buildings, they've done all kinds of things. And I picked one school district, so Clintonville. I don't know if anyone's in here in Clintonville. So they had ESSER funds of $2.18 million, okay? They spent money on buildings, on curriculum, on staff, professional development, technology, all kinds of things, and many of those are ongoing. And I can pull a detailed report. It's all out on the internet. You can do it too, but if someone wants me to pull one for their school, it takes me about an hour to 2 hours to pull this. but this gives you information on how they spend it. So on curriculum supplies, $545,000. Mental health compensation, $422,000. I would really want to know what they did with the kids for $422,000. Compensation for teachers, $216,000. Teacher compensation, another line, $187,000. So they've got their hand out now, and they want people to ante up anywhere from 8 to 20 million. And I think Outagamie it was a huge number. I don't remember. They just got theirs passed. And we need to educate people so they can go into these schools and say, explain yourself. Here's the buckets. What did you spend this on? And you have to own it like it's a household. We can't overspend our household and just go and get a loan every time we can't manage our money. We have to hold these folks accountable. And maybe, if nothing else, push that referendum down to be the lowest you can get, because they're going to ask for the moon. And again, it's the transparency, and parents and tax. And I will tell you, we've done a lot of, my husband and I and teams, we've done a lot of door knocking. And so many people are pissed about their taxes because they continue to go up. The other thing is, so many schools have multiple bonds out there already from previous referendum. And I'll tell you, this is my personal opinion. You don't need a damn new school, because a new school is not helping these kids do math or reading. Absolutely. Like, no one should be approving a new building being built. There's nothing wrong with these old ones, and spend a little bit of money repairing it for once instead of letting it go. But spending and building these monstrosity schools, it's ridiculous. Beside the fact that 2 middle schools in my county, they just built them, spent all kinds of money. It has so much glass in it. I'm like, this is ridiculous. This isn't safe. And in 2 middle schools, there are no urinals in the boys' bathroom. Now you might say, why do you care about that? Any parent who has a little boy, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And the custodians are pissed. And guess what? The children don't want to go to the bathroom during the day because it's awful in there, because there's no urinals, right? So whose brainchild was that? So if you are building a school, I would suggest that someone look at what the things were, because nobody knew it till we did the tour. And men went into the bathroom and they're like, there's no urinals in there. So, sounds crazy, but it's, you have to say, why aren't there? Well, they're getting ready for girls to go into the boys' bathroom. Why else would they be doing that? Right? I mean, doesn't take a rocket science to figure that one out. The other thing I'm really upset about, and I spend time talking about, is the pornography and the issues that our children have today. Okay, some of it is done in school, some of it is outside of school, but it is a huge issue with children. And I'm talking children from, 11, 12 on up. And it's one thing to read the stats. So I've been reading stats and talking to people that are in this field, and I'm a grandma. I don't even have kids in the system. So, it's hard for me to wrap my head that this is such an issue, but it truly is. I did have the opportunity, and this was a point where the light bulb went on for me, and I'm digging in even harder. I was invited to talk to Turning Point and the Young Republicans in Oshkosh at the university. And so here I am, I'm gonna go talk about pornography to these young kids, and I'm like, this is a little embarrassing, I'm a grandma, and I said that to them. I'm like, I'm not really comfortable talking, but I think this is an issue that we need to talk about. And I thought it was gonna be a 30-minute presentation, no one's gonna ask questions, no discussion, and I'd be out of there. And so I was going through my spiel and talking about the stats and everything, and all of a sudden hands were going up like crazy. These young kids that are 18, 19, 20 wanted to share their experiences and what they saw while they were in school. I was there for 2 hours. 2 hours. And I walked away saying, oh my God, this really is an issue. And it made those stats that I was reading on paper very personalized with those kids' stories. Because these kids were from all, some were from California, most were from the state of Wisconsin, but from other areas, not necessarily from Oshkosh, and they had stories to tell. Like one kid said, I had a wrestling coach for 4 years. I loved him. I thought he was a great guy, and he got let go because he was inappropriate conduct with a 12-year-old girl. This is happening more and more and more. And they also told me that while they were, because it's hard to well, how are they seeing this? It's on their phones. It's on their phones, and they're watching hardcore pornography. This bends at the mind of young people who, if that's what they think a relationship is like, it's not. They're not understanding what a man and a woman's normal relationship is when they're watching that kind of pornography. And they shared with me that during class, kids are watching it. When they're on the sports bench, all the guys are passing their phones, and it's not just guys, girls are watching it as well. And why this is important, there is something called sextortion going on. And kids are online and they think they're talking to another kid their age, and a lot of times it's a boy and a girl, and they think it could be either or on one end, and they think they're talking to the opposite sex, and they start grooming them, and they ask them to send pictures. The minute they send pictures, then they realize it was an adult on the other end of the line, and they're saying, if you don't give me money or if you don't do this, I'm going to put this out on social media. And when you're a 15, 16, 17-year-old, you don't know how to process that. And those kids are starting to commit suicide. And we're hearing it more and more and more. And I will tell you, legislators all across the U.S. are trying to work on this. But know that that's a real problem. So that's one of the things that I'm working on. I don't have an answer that's easy to fix it other than the awareness factor and trying to help parents understand to lock their phones down. We had a dad come talk to us in October whose son had at 17 committed suicide. He said, I am a director of IT. I locked my kid's phone down. I thought I had everything done. I know everything there is to know about technology, and it goes after my son committed suicide. I went and checked his phone, and he had 2 pornographic sites that I did not know about. So this is not to be depressing, but to really raise awareness about that this is truly an issue. The other thing that I spend time talking about is ideologies being taught in our schools. And again, I think I talked about this the last time I was here. They're teaching white privilege, a lot of activism. There's things like and we're talking kindergarten, in middle school, or grade school. They started out young, and you can look at every individual act and think, oh, that doesn't seem so bad. But you know what? You started in pre-K and kindergarten, you start introducing all these crazy things that by 3rd grade, they're teaching them to walk around and like they're on a picket line, with signs. That does really happen. And you have to know what kind of books are actually in the classroom. I got a call from a lady in Wrightstown, and was telling me the books that were in the 2nd grade, and it was called Rise Up and Write It. It was a read aloud book, so it wasn't in the library, it was actually in the classroom, and it was one that the teacher was reading aloud to the kids. In it, there was a pull-out letter to the mayor, a ready-to-sign petition. It had community meeting posters and a protest sign in it, and it introduced topics like we were living on stolen land, colonization, communism, and Marxism in the 2nd grade, just at a school not very far from here, okay? So again, just trying to make sure people are educated. I'm gonna skip a lot because I've got about 5 or 6 minutes. A lot has been in the news, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of it. DPI, Department of Instruction, earlier this year was found out that they hid 200 cases of sexual misconduct among educational professionals. They weren't all teachers, but it's anyone that might have been in a school. And what they did was, they found out there was a situation, not calling the parent and enlightening them, or calling authorities. What they did is they quietly made these go away. So rather than bring law enforcement into it and actually make the public aware that there was an issue, they just quietly, let the person resign in most cases, and they just go down the block to the next school and start working there. So over 200 cases. So that is going through the court system. And again, thank you to the legislators of Wisconsin, because they got a bill passed that made grooming children a felony. It was huge, 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 because law enforcement was trying to deal with some of this, and it wasn't clear on the books. So yay for them. Which is the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, works a lot with people, not only in Wisconsin, but with cases regarding parental rights across the nation. But they had a lot of Title IX complaints, and they've been working with parents on those. Moms for Liberty has something on our website. If there is a Title IX compliance issue or a DEI, you can go on and log the complaint on our website, and then Moms for Liberty scrapes this data periodically and sends it directly to the Office of Civil Rights. Once the Office of Civil Rights gets a complaint like that, they have to investigate it. So if you think there's something going on, even in another school district, work up with a Moms for Liberty chapter, and we can do that for you. The Racine Unified School District faced scrutiny from parents and residents because at their high school they have an aquatic center that is open to the community, and there was a guy that, I don't know, he looked to be 60, 65, that said he was a woman and was going into the girls' locker room. Now there are students in that locker room, and they were going back and forth, fighting it, and they were saying, there's nothing we can do, that's the policy, we have to let him in. He got arrested actually in the parking lot after being in that girls' bathroom. You can imagine what he was doing in his car, and they caught him doing that. So he was under arrest, and they're working on changing that policy. As of April 26th, Oconto Falls School District is facing a federal lawsuit alleging that they had school employees for the last 15 to 20 years where it's been a pattern of abuse, where they covered up sexual misconduct by the staff. And there are 7 plaintiffs, and I think the last I heard 2 more have signed on, so there's 9 plaintiffs, and probably more that are going to come up. So think of that, 15 to 20 years that was going on that parents did not know. It's not acceptable. The U.S. Department of Education has launched an investigation into the new Richmond school. That one's been on the news a lot over the last several months, thanks to Moms for Liberty, because we have a good social media channel. Boys in the girls' bathrooms, that girls were complaining and saying they're not comfortable, and they were told, it's not our problem, go down and use the single stall, which is in another area of the school, which made them late for class. This is like the 5th case I've heard that's like this. It's like one boy gets to disrupt all these girls. A 16-year-old girl went live on social media and kind of said her thing, and they've got representation now, and it's been handed off to the Office of Civil Rights, and there is an investigation there. And I will say, there are some weird laws within Wisconsin. Schools can get sued on either side, but if I was part of the school board, I'll take supporting 200 girls against one guy. I think the public is not going to say that's the wrong thing to do, right? And then in New London, recently you guys had your own little issue in the newspaper with the teacher who was snorting coke in the bathroom, and I guess she was arrested, and it's moving through the legal system. So I don't know what's wrong with the country. The morals and values are not there. We need prayer back in school. We need We need to hold people accountable. We need discipline in the schools because it's chaotic and teachers can't teach because there's just so much going on. And so that's what we're spending our time in Wisconsin, and we'll take, when people have issues, they bring them forward. If we can help them, we will. Sometimes we can't, but we'll give them resources where they can reach out to, because we're really pretty finite in terms of K through 12 parental rights. That's our sweet spot. That's where we spend the majority of our time. But that's what I have today. Support your local chapter. They're doing a lot of good things here. We're trying to expand. So if you have friends or relatives in other counties, please have them reach out to Moms for Liberty and join our organization, because we're doing a lot in Wisconsin. And I'll open it up. Do I have time for questions?
Absolutely. You got 25 minutes. Can I ask the first one?
Yes, you can.
There's a lot of conservatives on school boards around the state that think, now that Trump's in office, we don't have to worry about these Title IX things. Not the case, because our DPI is still pushing school boards to do the radical LGBT reforms that Biden put in.
Right.
And there's still at least 60 school districts around our state that have left their policies in place to allow males, biological males, to use the girls' facilities and vice versa. And the DPI is basically saying, you guys are legal, the Trump administration is wrong.
Right.
So you cannot rest on our laurels on this. It has to move ahead, and those districts should be changing their policy. Some of them just didn't change it because they didn't think they had to, now that the federal courts have somewhat ruled on it. But you need to have your local policies, and you need to tell your local people where you stand with your school board.
Yeah, Chris brings up a really good point, and I want to personally, and I know my husband feels the same way, big shout out to Chris, because he supports us in the Winnebago district and across Wisconsin. He has helped our candidates run for school board. I stepped up and took on a chapter. I don't have kids in the school. My husband joined the school board. We're not even from this area, but don't have kids in the school, but it's like, if not us, who, right? People, we all have to stand up and do what's right for the community, because there's so many people that for whatever reason don't feel like they can. But Chris brings up a really good point. When they were going through in July and August of last year about the Title IX, I was speaking a lot at school boards, and I was pushing them, saying, this is wrong, you shouldn't do it. And at one point, a superintendent said to me, Laura, I don't know why you're spending so much time on this policy, because it already is in our policy. And I said, what? And they said, read our policy. Now, you have to also understand that the policy doesn't say Title IX. It's like a non-discrimination, blah, blah, blah. So when people see that on an agenda, they think, well, I don't want anyone to be discriminated against, so I'm not going to the school board. But in 2017, so this was last year when they were doing this Title IX, in 2017, Neola changed that policy to allow gender identity in boys and girls bathrooms and girls and boys bathroom. It was in the policy. When I pulled that up and then I talked to all the parents, not one parent knew it was in the policy since 2017. So again, think about how devious this whole Marxism process is. They made that change very quietly and secretive across, I'm sure, all of Wisconsin and beyond, that parents didn't even know that was the policy. So once it started really happening, they're like, it's the policy, we have to allow it. It's the law. Right, you guys were really good. You don't have Neola policies, and you were great getting rid of that. But we just turned the board in Winneconne, and that's one of the first things we're going to look at is the policies, because there are so many that really keep the lack of transparency, all these little hidden things that are in there. We need to take the language out so that we can protect our kids.
Yeah, well, I didn't get to my question.
Oh, sorry.
Moms for Liberty endorses good candidates, and that endorsement is gold because people know what you stand for. If you're endorsed by Moms for Liberty, there's no doubt where you stand. And Andy Thorpe, who ran last spring and won, along with Holly Schweitzer, had that endorsement, and it was a tough race because the people, the lady running against him was worked pretty hard and had some money behind her, but they won, and I think Moms for Liberty endorsement helped immensely. So my question is, number one, how did you do in your endorsements for the spring election and school boards? And then two, can you tell what you're going to be doing for the August and fall election as far as making endorsements and how candidates that align with your values can apply to get that endorsement?
Good question. We only endorse school board candidates. So as far as in the fall, we are unable to endorse anybody else, but we certainly, as an organization, will go out and door knock and do whatever we can to help get people across the finish line. Moms for Liberty does mean a good endorsement to conservative people, but I will also say it can be a double-edged sword. And depending on the opponent, it may hurt, in some places it may hurt them. So we always leave that up to the candidate because we can endorse, it's just about how public you want it to be. And like anything, every race you have to look at the environment and make the call, and we will work with candidates to do that. We did pretty well, not as well as we did last year across Wisconsin, and there was reasons behind that. We got really late in some areas trying to coordinate with the GOP. In Winnebago County, where my chapter is, we put 2 new people on the Winnebago County board. In Oshkosh, we had 2 candidates. One got across, one didn't, and he's gonna run again next year. But he was very late to the table, had never door knocked, didn't use some of our recommendations, and sometimes you have to go through that yourself and realize, okay, I'm willing to listen to people that maybe have done this a few times. And then we did one in Outagamie County. He ran a good race, but he didn't win. And we're going to debrief with him as well. Tony, you want to talk? Do you want to?
I just wanted to comment on the Outagamie experience, which was not positive. Mike Jockey ran a great race, but he got trounced. And I think it was associated with also the school referendum. That's what I was going to say. It's hard to fight these school referendums. They wanted $15 million a year for 4 years, $60 million after there had been a different referendum several years ago for building buildings. We tried to fight the school referendum. We tried to point out the issues of underperformance of the students and that the per student spending has kept up with inflation. But honestly, that thing passed 2/3 to 1/3 of school referendum. And with that, Mike Johnson got beat by a lot too, and he lost his county seat as an example. So the comment is it's really hard to fight these school referendums. We kept hearing we don't care about the children. We got to care about the students. And it's hard to fight that message. And it makes me wonder, as a legislator coming up in January, is there any oversight over these school referendums? It just seems like they're limitless. And they just keep asking for more money, like you said.
I think where there's good parent organizations, and they've been talking about it for a while, it's hard to go out for the first time and say those kinds of things and people don't necessarily even believe it. We have to get more people out talking constantly and educating what's really happening. But yeah, he ran a good race. I think he did all the right things, but it's very liberal. He would have been the only conservative on there. We need more conservatives to step forward and run in Outagamie and maybe run as a team on a team ticket. And maybe we'll definitely have a different strategy because we are going to meet with them and just do a debrief. But yeah, you have to know your audience and you have to know, what's important to the people around. And part of that is you need to be able to pivot when you're out door knocking too, right? Like you're going to have your lit with your 3 to 5 things that are really important that you think, but if you're out there door knocking and you're like, boy, a lot of people are talking to me about taxes. I mean, gosh, that's what we heard. Taxes, you need to be able to talk about that. And that led into saying you don't want another referendum because that's going to raise your taxes. So we were able to use that to our advantage. But you really have to understand what's going on in your community. Yes, sir.
Are you able to compare or contrast Wisconsin with other states? Where do we rank nationally? And maybe you can't tell us that, but not every state is in the same situation, is it?
Most of the states are in 50% of the kids in our nation can't read it. Now, there are some states that are better, and there are some school districts that are better, but in essence, 50% of the kids cannot read or write at grade level. But I think the last time I looked, we were ranked, Wisconsin was late in the upper 30s. But I'd have to check that again.
And as a follow-up then, can you tell us anything about where the administration is at with the disbandment of the Department of Education?
Interesting, Linda McMahon is going to be at our Wisconsin State meeting in May, so hopefully we'll get an update. I have heard that she has actually cut the department staff significantly. What I don't have details on is, well, what does that mean? Yeah, you've cut the fat maybe, but what changes are really being made? I will say we've got some projects that we're trying to work on curriculum, to see, because even, and I'll use Wisconsin. I was talking to someone about Mississippi, and they're doing great. I mean, they're leading the change. They've been doing this, I think, for 5 or 6 years now. Wisconsin is slow rolling the implementation of phonics. In our district, they've pushed it to 2027, so they're doing a little bit every year instead of saying, oh my gosh, the house is on fire, let's implement it the best we can and get it really rolling. So every district is probably implementing that because the law said you had till 2027 to actually get it done. And so there's just so much change that needs to happen, but there are school boards that have really turned it around. Waukesha is one of them. They've really moved the needle from their curriculum and where their kids are testing out. I think it was Kettle Moraine, because we were just at a school board training, so I talked to some of these people. Kettle Moraine has no debt for their school. I mean, so you get a good conservative school board in there and give them a couple of years to drive some change, and it can happen. And we're actually talking with some of these school board presidents trying to figure out, how did you do that? And, they said it wasn't easy. People were fighting them, and they just had to stand tall and say, this is what we're doing. We're not going to build a new school. We're not going to spend money on this. Because they always have all these reasons why you have to give these kids all this extra stuff that at the end of the day doesn't help them read, right? But you have to have a board that's willing to stand together collectively and take that kind of heat. And then 2 years later you can say, see, it's worth it, because now we're up, we're at the higher end of where the results are. Yes?
First, I want to thank you for your work with Monster Liberty. I know individuals like yourself, Scarlett Johnson, down in the Southeast Wisconsin area. You guys have been doing phenomenal work and activating around the various counties around the state. My question to you is, how do you activate fathers? Because I think one of the things we've seen over the last several decades was the excising of the father, the destruction of the nuclear family. So with the work that you guys do, how do we activate fathers? What would be your message to them?
You know, within Moms for Liberty, we have lots of fathers, so I think we, you know, if they're informed, and the reason I got into this, because two dads were talking about the book, so that's, they were very activated. It's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer that I can give you. I think the churches need to get more involved and take a stance on a lot of this instead of being so wishy-washy. But you know, and this is my personal opinion, so it's not necessarily Moms for Liberty. I hear a lot of blame put on the parents. Like, it's the parents' fault that the kids can't read and can't do math at grade level. And you know what? My mom and dad never sat down and did homework with me. Never. You know, when you came home from school, like, get your homework done because you're not going outside to play until it's done, and you did it. They didn't sit down and make sure I had my homework done. I don't know why we're putting that kind of blame on parents today. Quit blaming. I doesn't mean that maybe they need to take a more active role to ensure they're getting their homework done, but understand the dynamics of what's going on in a school. Kids don't have to turn homework in anymore, okay? The teachers don't always grade homework. My one granddaughter went to Appleton North, and as a freshman, she was starting to flunk out when my daughter started checking in. It's like, well, she doesn't test well, and at that time, 100% of the grades were on tests. They didn't turn any homework in. Well, if you never give kids feedback on the homework, how do they know what's right or wrong? And I will say in Winneconne, talking to parents, they don't do any homework in grade school. Then they get to middle school and all of a sudden they have to do homework. But they don't, you know, they do worksheets in school, but they don't get graded. And they don't go home. So how can the parents know what's going on if the homework never gets sent home with a red mark at the very top as to what was right or wrong? So there is so much that has to get fixed. I don't think it's a simple answer.
No, it's not an easy answer at all, but thank you for laying it out there. Like
Okay, thank you.
Laura, I could add something to that.
Please do.
Yes, blaming the parents doesn't work, but engaging parents is important. And one of the ways we've done in New London is beginning with the next school year, 3rd and 4th grade, you can't promote the kid to 4th grade if he isn't at 3rd grade level by the time he reaches the end of 3rd grade. That's what the southern states have done that have excelled in the last few years, like Mississippi. We heard from Louisiana, they went from 49th in 2019 to 32nd last year by one of the ingredients was 3rd and 4th grade, you can't be promoted. There's exceptions for severely mentally handicapped, intellectually handicapped kids and kids that don't speak English yet, who just came to the country, but they have to have 2 years of English as a second language before you can hold them back on a calendar.
And how did parents, do you have any feedback for the parents?
It goes into effect this fall.
Okay.
And holding kids back we've done that for a couple hundred years in America. And it was in 2012 that they stopped doing it here in New London and many other school districts. And they said, and it was mostly the psychologists that said, oh, this is bad for kids' self-esteem, and it's going to lead to mental illness and things like that if you hold them back. They have no data about that. They don't give proof of it. But
Right.
They say that, and it became a mantra in the education system. And the DPI discourages holding kids back for any reason. Just keep promoting them no matter how far behind.
Yep.
But by holding kids back, especially 3rd and 4th grade, because if you reach 4th grade and you're not up to snuff, the chances of ever catching up in high school are
Right.
fall off greatly. So that's why the pinch point becomes. There's states that have that as state law, but Tony Evers would never sign that law here.
Yeah. So if we get a new governor, we can push that again.
It can be statewide, but any district can pass it in their district, and we won't, imagine this, along about February or January, the teacher says, Johnny is way behind. If he doesn't get caught up by the end of May, he's looking at another year of third grade. That engages the parents. Doesn't blame the parents, it engages them to say,
Right.
okay, Johnny, you're not gonna get on the internet, you're not gonna watch TV, you gotta get caught up. And, most of the finding in Louisiana, I was talking to the guy from Louisiana that said, they're finding that these kids that are born, 9/10 of them catch up. But if there's no consequence, they never get held back. They just get continued.
Pushed along, right, and the gap just gets greater. And it's interesting, one thing about parents, we actually, before the state made the change of the law, we took cell phones out of the school day. I'll tell you, parents were not happy with that, not happy, even though we were showing them the results as to how negative it is to have them have their phones throughout the day. And that's where, I think in general our legislators want less laws as well, but sometimes you have to step forward and enforce some of these things with legislation in order to get the compliance across the state and the schools to make some of this stuff happen. So I'm sure, and the other thing, the reason we don't, I think a big reason why we don't hold kids back, because schools have a 10 points on their scorecard, and districts have it as well. There's 10 different things, and math and reading is one of those 10 things, but the other thing is graduation rate. If you have a really good graduation rate, you get extra points. And if you have nobody that's been held back, well, hello, you're really grading the wrong things for that school's behavior. They're like, well, we don't want to hold anyone back because it affects our overall score, and we want to be able to say we're at 75%. And so that whole system needs to be looked at. And again, until we get a conservative governor up there, we're really, we got to do what we can at the grassroots level and at the school board levels to try and see change. But boy, if we get a different person in there, there's a lot of legislation that I think can happen and really turn some of this stuff around. Yes?
Well, building on what Chris had just said, when I ran for state superintendent of public instruction in '93 and '97 and 2001, I was saying exactly that. Kids need to be at grade level by third grade, or they need to be held back. And when people said to me, as a teacher, department chairman, et cetera, when they said to me, well, it's going to hurt their little psyches, I said it's going to hurt their little psyches a whole lot more as they're being pushed on and on and on, and every year less capable of doing the work. They're going to be disruptive, or they're eventually going to drop out. Now, what good does that do for the community, for the state, for the nation? But, of course, I didn't win my races for state superintendent, so.
Yeah.
But I put it out there.
Where was the pushback in the schools on that? You know what I mean, when you're trying to do that? Does it come from other teachers? Does it come from administration? Like, how can we fight that at a local level?
Well, I had good support from a lot of people in my school district, which was Hortonville, for 40 years. Coming in at the strike time, and we really cleaned things up.
Yeah, well, thanks for trying and standing up. We need more people. Yes?
Just to add on to that, and Chris's comment about the kids not being held back for psychological reasons. I think it would be just as hard on them, pushing them through and the psychological side of it, because eventually nobody cares about me. I'm not getting the help I need, and you feel that pressure of constantly being behind. I guess I see that on the other side of it, that the psychological side of it is gonna be just as bad if you don't hold them back.
Many of us agree with that. I don't know why they're doing it. It's part of the bigger ugly plan that they have. The other thing is, the fact that we have all these social workers and counselors in schools spending time with your kids, and I know there's some very good ones out there, but there are many that are not. I would tell parents, don't ever let the counselor be with your kid by themselves. You need to say, there are opt-out forms that you can get to say, if you're gonna talk to my kid, I need to be with them. Yeah. Any other questions? Great, I appreciate you letting me speak to you tonight.